It's often said that war is decided by bullets, cannons, and brilliant generals. But in the winter of 1918, we learned a different lesson, a far more bitter one. War is actually decided by stomachs. Look at us. This is the 5th Assault Team, the darlings of Emperor Wilhelm, the men known as the Stoßtruppen, storm soldiers. The Berlin press called us war gods, the sharp swords that would end this bloody war. But beneath that glamorous facade, we were just ghosts. Ghosts wandering in baggy uniforms with belts tightened to the very last eye to ward off stomach aches. We almost conquered the world. We had Paris in our sights. But in the end, we were defeated, not by the bravery of the enemy, but by the aroma of a slice of canned beef. January 1918. The Western Front. Germany was dying. The Royal Navy blockade had turned our homeland into a giant prison. No food, no fertilizer, no hope. Back home, my mother wrote that she had to boil leather belts for broth. And here, right on the front lines, we, the most elite, were eating Kriegsbrot. Do you know what it tastes like? It's a mixture of rotten potato flour and sawdust. When you chew it, it crunches in your teeth like sand. It doesn't feed you, it only buys you a few more hours of death. But ironically, that very hunger turned us into perfect killing machines. Colonel Richter would often stand before the troops and say, "Look over there. The English, the French. They're fat and well-fed. They're lazy. They don't know how to fight because they've never suffered like you," he said. He was half right. The deprivation had stripped us of our humanity, leaving only the most primal instincts for survival. We no longer fought for glory. We fought for envy. An insane envy of well-fed enemies. We were trained in new tactics. Hutier tactics. No more stupid sideways charge. We were taught to move like a flood. Find low points, find weak points, infiltrate, and destroy from within. We were equipped with the best remaining weapons of the Empire. The MP-18, a metal monster capable of spewing death at 500 rounds a minute. Heavy bags of cluster grenades slung over our shoulders. We were strong, but we were empty inside. A tragic irony. The world's most dangerous army was also the world's hungriest. March 21st, 1918. Judgment Day. Operation Michael. Germany's final gamble. That night, a thick fog enveloped the Somme. God seemed to be blind to what was about to happen. I remember sitting next to Hans, the youngest soldier in the platoon. He was only 19, as thin as a skeleton. He was trembling, not from fear, but from hypoglycemia. "Lieutenant," he whispered, his voice hoarse. Do they really have chocolate over there?" The question was heartbreakingly naive. In this moment of life and death, he wasn't asking about heaven or hell. He was asking about a candy bar. "Yes, Hans," I lied. Or perhaps I was telling the truth. "There's plenty. And it will all be ours." 4:40 a.m. 6,000 cannons roared. It wasn't sound. It was an earthquake. The ground beneath our feet convulsed. The sky blazed with ghostly flashes of light. But this time, the artillery wasn't just firing explosives. They were firing Buntschießen, colorful fire. We sat there, gas masks on, listening to our own ragged breathing, waiting for the moment to plunge into hell. 9:40 a.m. We climbed out of the trench. Fog and gunpowder smoke mingled to form a gray curtain. Visibility was less than 10 meters. We sped like ghosts. No shouting, no drums or trumpets, only the grinding of boots on mud and the clicking of gunfire. This was the age of stormtroopers. The British lines crumbled faster than we had imagined. The combination of artillery and infiltration tactics had paralyzed them. We swept past machine gun emplacements, threw grenades into bunkers, and kept running. The order was clear: don't stop. Penetrate deep into enemy territory. Break their will. By noon, we had advanced 5 kilometers. A record. A miracle. We reached a British forward command post near the village of La Fère. The area was still intact. Our artillery had spared it. I kicked open the wooden door of the command bunker. My finger tightened on the trigger, ready to fire. But there was no one inside. The British officers had fled. And then, I saw it. On the oak table, not a battle map, but a feast. A pristine white loaf of bread, soft as cotton. A glistening block of butter. A plate of smoked bacon, still smelled of wood smoke. And a bottle of Bordeaux red wine. I stood rooted to the spot. The MP-18 slowly lowered. That scent. The scent of abundance, of wealth, of peace. It assaulted me more powerfully than any poison. It awakened the monster sleeping inside me. Hans rushed up behind me. He bumped into my back, then froze as well. I heard the sound of a gun falling to the ground. Clack. A soldier discarding his weapon in the middle of the battlefield. A crime punishable by immediate execution. But I couldn't draw my gun and shoot him, because my own hand was trembling as I reached for that loaf of bread. We tore the bread apart like wild animals. We stuffed our mouths full of meat and butter. Tears welled up in my eyes, not from happiness, but from humiliation. In that moment, as the sweetness of the beef melted on our tongues, the cruel truth struck us. We had been deceived. The Emperor said that the U-boats had cut off the British supply lines, that the enemy was starving just like us. But look, they have butter, they have wine, they have everything. We're not fighting a dying army. We're fighting a world of material abundance, something this impoverished Germany can never defeat. Lieutenant, Hans said, his mouth still full, tears mixing with the grease on his smudged face. Why do we have to fight? They have it all. That question echoed in the cramped bunker, and it was the death knell for our fighting spirit. Outside, the gunfire continued. The attack continued. But here in this bunker, the storm soldiers were dead. Only starving peasants remained. And this was only the beginning of the collapse. March 24th, 1918. We had advanced over 40 miles. An unbelievable number. On the map at General Staff, red arrows were piercing the Allied lines like spears into the side of a wounded beast. The generals in Berlin must be popping champagne. They thought the war was over, but they weren't here. They couldn't smell the stench of decay beginning to spread within the ranks of the victors. My unit was ordered to capture the town of Albert. This town wasn't just a strategic point, it was a huge warehouse. As we advanced, the British resistance was surprisingly weak. They fired a few volleys as a formality and then retreated. Perhaps they feared the ferocity of the stormtroopers. Or perhaps they knew what awaited us there. We broke down the door of a large wine cellar located in the basement of the town hall. The moment the oak door swung open, a pungent aroma rushed out, overpowering the smell of gunpowder and corpses. The smell of aged French wine. The smell of cognac. The smell of rum. Thousands of bottles stacked on top of each other, glistening in the flashlight beam like precious jewels. "Stop!" I yelled, trying to regain my authority as a commanding officer. Our mission is to pursue. We must not stop. But my shout was drowned out by the frenzied cheers. The iron discipline of the Prussian army, forged over hundreds of years, crumbled in an instant. My soldiers, who just yesterday had crawled under artillery fire without fear, now rushed to the barrels of wine like madmen. They smashed the necks of the bottles with their rifle butts. They drank directly from the barrels. Red wine spilled out, dripping down their chins and chests, mixing with dried blood to create a disgusting mixture. I saw Hans. He was sitting slumped on the floor, one hand clutching a bottle of champagne, the other an opened can of beef. He was both crying and laughing. "Drink up, Lieutenant!" he shouted, his eyes red with drunken rage. "The war is over! Look, we're in paradise!" I wanted to draw my gun and fire a shot into the air. I wanted to punish them for their disobedience. But my hands were stiff. My stomach churned. My throat was parched. I looked at the bottle lying at my feet. A bottle of fine Bordeaux wine, something I'd never even dreamed of owning. And then, I collapsed. I picked up the bottle. I took a long gulp. The bittersweet taste of fermented grapes assaulted my nostrils, paralyzing my senses. I sat down next to Hans. I ate. I drank. I forgot who I was. I forgot my mission. I forgot that outside the British were gathering. The entire town of Albarat had become a giant feast of chaos. Drunk German soldiers lay sprawled in the streets. Some, dressed in women's silk clothes they'd found in shops, danced wildly on the wreckage of tanks. Others fought over a box of cigars. No guards. No weapons maintenance. Cannons left abandoned in the rain. Precious MP-18 machine guns lay scattered in puddles of mud mixed with alcohol. That night, I had a strange dream. I saw myself sitting at a lavish party in Berlin. My wife, in a magnificent evening gown, smiled and offered me a glass of wine. But when I raised the glass to my lips, I realized it wasn't wine. It was blood. And when I looked down at the table, the food wasn't beef or bread. It was the flesh of dead soldiers. I woke up with a start. My head ached terribly. My mouth was bitter with the taste of honey and sour wine. I scrambled to my feet and left the wine cellar. Dawn was breaking. But it wasn't a clear dawn. The sky was a blood red. A rumbling sound echoed from the distance. Not thunder. It was artillery. Allied artillery. They had returned. And this time, they weren't running away. I looked around. My elite troops, the pride of Germany, lay fast asleep in their own vomit. They were no longer wolves. They were pigs waiting to be slaughtered. I kicked Hans hard. "Wake up! Wake up, you idiot!" He groaned, refusing to open his eyes. "Let me sleep, Mother. Let me sleep." A whistling sound ripped through the air. Boom! An artillery shell landed right in the middle of the town square. Shrapnel flew everywhere. Screams erupted, not the shouts of battle, but the screams of utter panic. Drunk soldiers struggled to their feet, stumbling for their guns, falling headlong into each other. The Australian and Canadian troops were pouring in. They were fresh, they were healthy, and they were furious. And us. We were fighting the enemy in the worst condition a soldier could be in, drunk and with full bellies. I pulled out my Luger and fired a shot into the air. "Get into position, or I'll shoot you all." But it was too late. The false euphoria of victory killed us before the first enemy bullet reached us. We had traded the crown of victory for a night of drunken revelry. And now it was time to pay the price. March 27, 1918. Location fields, west of Albert. Time 5:45 a.m. They say there's nothing worse than fighting on an empty stomach. They're wrong. The worst thing is fighting with a stomach full of strange food, a pounding head from alcohol, and a heavy, weary body. 4 days ago, we were wolves. Today, we are fat, sluggish pigs trying to escape the slaughterhouse. Our assault has stalled, not because of a lack of ammunition, but because we don't want to leave. How can you order a soldier to march to his death when he's lying on a pile of silk-smoking Havana cigars and drinking fine wine? The momentum has collapsed. The spearheads of Operation Michael have blunted. And now the enemy is counterattacking. I lay prone in a waterlogged bomb crater. Beside me was Hans. He looked pathetic. His face was pale, and he was vomiting uncontrollably. He still carried his cloth bag, but instead of grenades, it was crammed with cans of beef and a half-empty bottle of liquor. "Hans, get rid of that bag!" I yelled amidst the shelling that churned the ground around us. "You can't run." Hans shook his head frantically, clutching the bag tightly as if it were his firstborn child. "No, Lieutenant, this is a gift from my mother. I can't go home empty-handed." Across the field, through the early morning mist, I saw them. Not British soldiers. The British were exhausted. They were newcomers. Wide-brimmed hats. Tall, muscular figures. Australian soldiers. They were fresh. They were strong. They moved with an energy we had lost since 1916. They didn't attack cautiously. They charged straight at us with the ferocity of Tasmanian devils. 8:30 a.m. Status line broken. The battle was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Before stormtroopers were the hunters. We weaved, we closed in, we killed. But today, we were the prey. My reflexes were sluggish. My vision was blurry from lack of sleep and lingering alcohol. When I raised my MP-18, my hand trembled. A soldier beside me stood up to throw a grenade, but he was too slow. A sniper bullet pierced his throat. He fell not to the metallic clang of weapons, but to the heavy thud of food containers falling from his jacket. He died on his spoils blood-stained sausages, cheese, and chocolate. We were forced to retreat. Retreat back to the rear. That was the most humiliating order for a Stoßtruppen. We were born to advance, not to flee. But look at my troops. They don't run. They crawl. They refuse to throw away their loot. One soldier carries a huge bale of smoked meat on his shoulder instead of a machine gun. Another stuffs his pockets with bottles of liquor, making his stride clatter like a circus act. Greed. That's what's killing us. We fear returning to the poverty of Germany more than we fear the enemy's bullets. We'd rather die full than starve. 1200 noon. Location Gamacourt Forest. Hans was hit. A shrapnel fragment lodged in his thigh. He fell face down into the mud. I rushed over, grabbed him by the collar, and pulled him away. "Get up, hang in there, Hans." "Lieutenant!" He gasped, his face pale. "It's too heavy. I can't walk." "Throw the bag away. Throw it away." I snatched the canvas bag from his shoulder. "No, don't!" He struggled back with desperate strength. "That's all I have if I go home with nothing. What's the point of this war?" His question was like a knife to my heart. The point of the war. We had killed, burned, sacrificed our youth. For what? For a can of foreign beef. Was the life of a German soldier so cheap that it was worth only as much as a British soldier's lunch? A burst of machine gun fire swept through the trees. Dust and rocks flew up into our faces. I looked at Hans. His eyes were vacant. "Lieutenant, my mother, she loved butter." Then his head slumped. Hans died. His hand still clutched the handle of the canvas bag full of canned goods. Blood from the wound in his thigh mingled with the red wine dripping from the broken bottle in the bag. Blood and wine. Sacrifice and pleasure. They mingled, seeping into the cold earth. I let go of his hand. I couldn't carry his body back, and I couldn't take that bag back to his mother either. I stood up alone. The MP-18 in my hand was now light because it was out of ammunition, but my soul felt heavy as lead. I looked one last time. Hans lay there, not looking like a soldier who had fallen for his country. He looked like a gluttonous child who had fallen asleep after an excessive party. 6:00 p.m. Location temporary defensive line. We had been pushed back to the starting line. I sat leaning against the crumbling trench wall. Around me were the remnants of the 5th Assault Team. This morning we had 200 men. Now fewer than 50 remained. Faces smeared with mud gunpowder smoke and, still crumbs of bread clinging to their beards. No one spoke a word. The silence that prevailed was not the silence of discipline. It was the silence of cruel understanding. We had seen the truth. The truth was not in the Emperor's eloquent speeches. The truth was in the British Army's enormous food supplies. We realized that we could never win this war. How could we defeat an enemy whose even their ordinary soldiers ate better than our general? How could the German spirit defeat the industry and logistics of the entire world? I pulled something out of my pocket. It was the wrapper of a chocolate bar I'd picked up yesterday. I brought it to my nose and sniffed. The sweet scent still lingered faintly. It was the smell of failure. We had tasted heaven for a brief moment, and now we had to return to hell. And that hell was now 1,000 times more terrifying, because we knew there was another world out there. The Allied artillery roared again, but this time I felt no fear. I felt no excitement. I felt only hunger, a hunger that could not be satisfied by food. The hunger of a soul that had realized the meaninglessness of everything. November 11th, 1918. Location: a freight car near the Belgian border. 11 a.m. Silence. It was the loudest sound I had ever heard in my life. For the past 4 years, my ears had become accustomed to the roar of cannons, the whistling of machine guns, and the groans of the dead. It had become my rhythm of life. But precisely at 11 a.m. today, it all stopped. As if God had just flipped a giant switch. No cheers, no triumphant trumpets. Only the pattering of rain on the cold tin roof of the freight car. Old Sergeant Carl sat opposite me. He removed the magazine from his Mauser rifle, looked at it for a long time, then threw it out the window. "It's over, Lieutenant," he said, his voice as empty as our stomachs. "We've lost." I leaned my head against the damp wooden wall. Defeated. That sounded strange. We were stormtroopers, weren't we? We'd captured Albert. We'd seen the Eiffel Tower from afar. We'd never been defeated in a fair duel. But we'd been defeated by time, by logistics, and by the exhaustion of our own people. December 10th, 1918. Location: Berlin. Friedrichstrasse Station. 4:30 p.m. The train rolled into Berlin. I'd imagined this scene 1,000 times during those cold winter nights in the trenches. I'd imagined flags flying everywhere, marching music, and my wife running to embrace me like a hero. But reality was a cold shower. The Berlin station was gray and chaotic. No imperial flags. Instead, red revolutionary flags. Rebel naval soldiers swaggered about, their weapons scattered. No one greeted us. The people of Berlin looked at us soldiers returning from the front with strange eyes. Not gratitude, but resentment and pity. In their eyes, we were the embodiment of failure. We were the reason they had been eating sawdust-filled bread for the past 4 years. I stepped onto the platform, my once proud stormtrooper uniform now stained with mud and tattered. The skull insignia on my cap looked like a cruel joke. A skinny, grimy child ran up and tugged at my coat. "Soldier, do you have anything to eat?" I felt my pockets. Empty. No more captured chocolates. No more British canned meat. Everything had been eaten or left behind on the humiliating retreat. I looked at the child. He was as thin as Hans, as Müller, as all of us. "No kid," I said, my voice choked. "I have nothing. I left everything behind in France." December 24th, 1918. Christmas Eve. Location: my apartment in Berlin. 7 p.m. My wife Clara placed a bowl of soup on the table. It was the first Christmas meal of peacetime. Beetroot soup. Again, beetroot. The soup was murky like the waters of the Somme. I looked at the bowl of soup, and memories flooded back like a tsunami. I remembered the cellar at Albert. I remembered the rich, buttery taste of the British Army. I remembered the sweetness of the red wine. I remembered the feeling of being a true human for those few short hours. And now, sitting in my own home, I felt more like an animal than ever before. "What's wrong, Eric?" Clara asked anxiously, taking my hand. "Aren't you hungry?" I stammered. "He's thinking about another meal." Out in the street, I heard people arguing. They were talking about the stab in the back, Dolchstoßlegende. They said the German army had never lost on the battlefield, that we were betrayed by politicians, by communists, by Jews in the rear. They shouted, "We are invincible." I laughed, a bitter laugh. They were lying, or they were deceiving themselves. We weren't stabbed in the back. We lost from the moment we saw the enemy's food supplies. We lost because we were an army of starving men trying to defeat a well-fed world. The bravery of the stormtroopers, their superior fighting skills, their spirit of sacrifice, all were meaningless before a simple law of nature. You can't march on an empty stomach. I picked up my spoon and scooped up a spoonful of beet soup. A bitter taste spread through my mouth. This is the taste of peace. This is the taste of truth. And this is the price we pay for our arrogance. I looked out the window. Snow began to fall on the ruined city of Berlin. Our generation, the stormtroopers, is dead. Not from bullets, but from disillusionment. And I truly fear that those hungry children out there, those children looking at us with hateful eyes, one day they will take up arms, not for the emperor, but for bread. And next time, they won't stop to eat.